Hello, and welcome to the Let's Examine Addiction Honestly podcast. My name is Charles. Today we will be talking about addiction and grief. Honestly, this one's kind of always been a huge part of my life. Probably about since when I started drinking. But as always, please understand that I'm not a trained professional and do not use this podcast as an alternative to proven medical methods, such as AA, NA, therapy, rehab, etc. So for addiction and grief, mine honestly goes back to when my great-grandma passed away in 2011. I honestly drank extremely heavily the night before that when I first got the call that she was going to be passing. And the night she did pass, one of my biggest regrets is that instead of being there with her when she passed away, I was drinking with friends trying to pretend that it wasn't happening. Second to that would just be not spending more time with her in general. Eats away at me probably about every day. It's one of the things I try not to dwell on too much because just like when she passed away, I hit drinking pretty hard, and I don't think she'd want me to do that. I don't think she'd want me to sit around and drink about what I did wrong and then miss more stuff in life and then have to drink about that and make a big giant circle and continuous problem for myself. I don't foresee her or anyone wanting us to do that. So I try to, not forget about it. I never want to forget that I did that because I think that would lead to me repeating that again because there's been some other events where they've happened and I've kind of hit drinking a little too hard. Recently, honestly, the one thing I can say positive I can say about doing that is it's kind of all squashed a lot of my want to drink. I have so much regret, from drinking that it just seems to cause more issues than anything. I was with my dad a few nights, whenever Thanksgiving was, 2 weeks ago, and I had 2 drinks when I was with him, and I think I had a drink before that when we were at my mom's before my wife drove over to my dad's. So, and honestly, a holiday I would have been all sorts of throwing them back, and just everything that's happened between my great grandpa passing, because he passed the Saturday after Veterans Day, which was the 15th of November that he passed away. And I was super heartbroken about it, but thankfully had no inclination to drink that night. I had to make the hard decision of going up there and seeing him. He was in a nursing home. They had COVID and influenza A running through him. So I had to make the choice between staying here and not getting sick or going up there and risking getting sick with both of those things and seeing him in the worst condition I would have ever seen him in outside of when he had his stroke. But this would have been worse because he would have been passing away, and I couldn't bring myself to go up there, and thankfully I didn't, as an alternative, stay here and heavily drink, honestly, while I throw back and forth whether I should have gone up there or not. It hurts me that I didn't go see him and be there when he passed, but he had my mom and my aunt, which were his daughters, up there with him. I think both of my sisters made it up there. It would have been nearly a 2.5-hour drive for me, on top of risking getting sick, and I unfortunately don't have the sick time for it. Otherwise, I'd have been there in a heartbeat, and I just kick myself for that and try to toss back and forth whether I should have gone. And while I could drink about it, I don't, honestly. If anything, it pushes me not to drink and make sure that shortly after that's when I started doing these 5-10 minute workouts every day, just because I don't truly want to get into that condition. He was so rough there towards the end, and he was only 75, which seems kind of old, but then I also look at other 75-year-olds that were in nowhere near as that condition like that. But he also served in Vietnam, so I definitely don't blame him for the years of drinking. He was at a time a major drinker, drank every day, had a kegerator, so he definitely threw back drinks hard, just like my great-grandma Pauline did. I think she passed in her 80s. I'm terrible with ages and birthdays and stuff, but she drank heavily too. And I noticed once they were forced to stop drinking, they went downhill really bad, so I definitely want to do some research into that, just because they were in bad shape when they got older, but also it seemed once they stopped drinking, they just really went downhill, and it definitely took a toll on me. My great-grandma's hit me really hard. The night I found out I drank so hard, and then because I was in the army at the time, and then went to formation and stuff the next day, probably honestly still drunk. And then the night she did pass away, once I'd gotten up there, also drank super hard and tried to, that one I definitely went through the stages of grief. I want to dedicate something to the stages of grief. I believe they do deserve their own episode, because for her I went through each of the stages, but for my grandpa I kind of saw it more coming. I had like my 2 dogs I had to have put down in 2023. Those one, I didn't really go through the stages of grief with them at least either. Like I didn't have the bargaining like that, or was like an instantaneously I dealt with it just because I had seen what was going on with them. I did have a lot of could I have done, should I have done, would this have worked going through my head. But honestly, I didn't do the bargaining portion. So I do want to dedicate like a whole episode to this, but I wanted to mainly go over 2 different articles I found. One was from Hazelden Betty Ford, which is Grief and Addiction, and then the Addiction Center, 4 Ways Grief Lead to Addiction, which I believe were so spot on, honestly. Especially with the Hazelden Betty Ford article. It just talks about how like grief and addiction are concepts that are so closely intertwined, and I feel that so much with my great grandma, and just how when it came time to that loss, I hit substance abuse so hard. Which the article says, complicated grief has been defined as a deviation from the normal in cultural and societal terms. Grief experience in either time, course, intensity, or both, entailing a chronic and more intense emotional experience which either lacks the usual symptoms or in which the onset of symptoms is delayed. Which honestly, that too, I really honestly didn't come to terms with her passing until I had gotten into therapy and talked about it there, and just kind of like went over like all my regrets and stuff, and how I was trying not to drink to kind of, I didn't really want to go through that, honestly. I didn't want to go through that heavy drinking again, and I didn't want to keep going through spouts of missing her and then wanting to drink and wanting to, pour the alcohol over the wound. And instead wanted to do something more beneficial with the feelings, and that's honestly kind of why I started this podcast and the Our Podcast I do, because I wanted to actually make something and let other people know they're not alone, and that we don't have to drink to kind of deal with these stupid mistakes that we made, because all it does is make you make more stupid mistakes. Honestly, if anything, I can drink all I want once I hit like 70. Party then when I'm retired, and I have a reason to drink and do dumb stuff when there's like no risk to anything really. Instead of now when I could be building like these podcasts, and I was making decals at one time. I'd like to get back into doing that, and like learning the guitar, and everything else that I could be doing right now, spending time with my dogs. Because especially when I lost my 2 pups, I thankfully didn't hit alcohol too hard back then too, but I was being a parent at the time and trying to do all that stuff. And then I had seen it coming. I was working 2 jobs, so I really had no time to drink. I was going from one job at like second to nights, and then getting up in the morning, early morning, taking kids to school, going to another job, getting off that job, going to the other job. So I really had no time to drink. And I honestly, any other time in my life, I probably would have hit it super hard. And that's why I really wanted to do like an episode on this, especially with my grandpa passing, is because I know I'm not the only person who's dealt with it. And it's not one of those things where substance abuse just kind of like goes away, especially when grief comes around. Like there was one day where I was like, oh, nicotine would be so good. But then I was like, I also have over a year and I think 3 months now of no nicotine whatsoever. Like none of the slowing down and sporadic usage, like none. I've been 15 months sober, or 15 months nicotine free, I guess. But, and it's one step. It's one step in, all the other things that I've got, a tendency to go overboard on, like shopping, or, trying to play the stock market, or buying like crypto and stuff and trying to do that. And I'm just trying to get a handle on all of them and go over the different things and kind of figure them out. And I think drinking just impedes that. I do make stupid decisions while drinking, especially like buying things that I don't need, or trying to research some dumb crypto that I hope could potentially, just get me out of debt, not even make me a billionaire. And I found like both these articles super important in kind of looking all that. The Hazelden Betty Ford one is definitely like a scientific article. It's a little bit harder to read through, a lot drier, does like a lot of statistics and everything, but I did like the portion about grief and substance abuse and kind of like the complexity of them, and just it gave me a little bit of an understanding. It's one of those things where it's so technical and scientific that it was a little like harder to read, and kind of got like all the different things in there. But the Addiction Center one is extremely helpful as well on just kind of everything that goes on with it, especially how grief is like overwhelming, that there's no real limit on how long you can grieve, and that grief isn't just a loss of somebody. It is definitely the death of somebody, like the loss of a relationship, another meaningful situationship in your life, which I saw another one that said, like, the job, like losing a job, you're going to grieve that. You're going to grieve if you lose your home, if you lose like a car that you had an attachment to. You could lose, like, I don't know, an action figure. And if you have like an emotional connection to it, you're going to go through grief on all these. And in our culture, like grief and like loss and like death, and so we avoid it so much, which is so weird. And we and humans in general try to avoid like things that make us uncomfortable and hurt. And kind of, as an alcoholic, I always like poured alcohol over everything and shoved it deep way down there, instead of, taking a couple minutes to kind of cry and understand why I feel like that. Because the first time I saw my dad cry, I was 10, and it was when he lost his father, and I didn't see him cry again until we were adults. Like, that's how long it was in between me seeing him cry. And I get like being strong, and his generation also does. I don't care. I'll cry in front of somebody. I try not to. Try to have a little bit of rein on my emotions. Like when I lost my 2 dogs in 2023, I was working like 2 jobs, plus I was like a head custodian for some schools. And so there were times where I'd pull up to the school and, a song had been on and I'd finish, crying and all that deep sorrow. I'd pull myself together and go in, do whatever I had to in that building, get back in, immediately break down, pull myself together, and go on to the next building. So if you are having an emotional time, just know it's nothing wrong with crying. I can't remember who had the saying, but if you want to think about what other people are thinking about, just like you're thinking about yourself, so are they. They're not going to remember that you cried. Unless you do something weird and you're like running around naked, but honestly, tearing up and like crying around somebody else, there's nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't do it all the time and become that person, but everybody's allowed to have a hard day. Your life matters. Your emotions matter. You're allowed to feel emotions without having to kind of bottle them up and pour whatever substance you use all over them. It doesn't do any good. But for the Addiction Center article and the 4 ways grief lead to addiction, the first one is hiding from and never dealing with grief, which I did so much for my great-grandma Pauline. Like I said, the night before I left and got the news, or the night I got the news, drank heavily. Next day, got the call from the Red Cross. Couldn't leave that night. The following night, I got to see her one last time, went out drinking, just trying to bury it and bottle it up and get rid of that feeling. And it didn't do me any good. I didn't deal with like her loss until I was an adult. So like 10 plus years later, honestly, before I actually, came to terms with it and like kind of forgave myself for being so stupid. I still think I'm a moron for choosing drinking over sitting with her when she passed. I should have been there. I regret not being there. It definitely wasn't the situation with my grandpa where he was in a nursing home and there was a bunch of illnesses. Like, she was at her son's house and I could have sat there with her all night. I could have read a book. I could have done something and been there. But saying that, I'm not going to change it now. There's nothing I can do now. And number 2 is using drugs and alcohol to cope. Honestly, that's kind of the same thing. The hiding from and never dealing with the grief kind of was like the long-term effects of it, but using drugs and alcohol to cope, that was definitely right there with it. The hiding was, I kind of hid the grief and pushed it away and kind of didn't deal with those complex emotions and just left them there and just kept pouring alcohol on them. And I'd get emotional when I was drinking, but at the time I did use alcohol to cope. I was using alcohol and just to get rid of that moment and kind of push that pain away and numb it down. And like the article says, the payoff isn't worth it. And it really wasn't. I got away from it for like a couple hours and that was it. If anything, I have more feelings coming from that, which the article also goes over too. The article for these are like 1 paragraph each and explains so much. Like it talks about how they do in the end create more negative feelings like depression, anxiety, stress, guilt, shame, and even health issues. Like the depression and guilt and shame, those ones so bad. Like it just hurt so much. Kind of afterwards, it helped in that moment, but afterwards it was terrible. And number 3 is replacing a person or relationship with a substance. There was like my longest relationship, which I was a terrible person throughout, and I'll go over it eventually. I definitely replaced that person like during the relationship and after with alcohol, and just I treated them like garbage. And it's so regretful, like a lot of the things I did. I hate like the person I became, especially because this person was always there for me. She always supported me was super loving, and in return all I did was treat her like absolute garbage. And if you hear little click clacks in the background, that's actually Canoe. I forgot to shut my door, so he's coming over here to make sure I'm okay. But yeah, for like replacing the person or relationship with alcohol, I definitely did it with my great grandma. I mean, even when I lost my 2 pups, I almost wanted to do it then as well, just because they were a huge part of my life. What are you doing? You are being so loud. I apologize, but I'm going to leave that in just because he is adorable. And at some point, I'll post pictures of his cute little self. And number 4 is actually lacking the proper coping skills. I mean, I really don't know if there's a person alive who's, automatically giving them good coping skills. I mean, it might, but for like me and my family, we never really talked about emotions. Like, I didn't see my dad's emotions outside of his dad dying until I was an adult and got to actually, see him be emotional and say things that were on his mind. He always just kind of hid them deep down inside and poured alcohol all over them. I mean, and you can see that a lot in veterans. Like, my grandpa was in Vietnam and he never knew how to deal with the coping of the stuff he saw. I messaged my grandma about him and she said she didn't know anything outside of that he served, that he really didn't talk about any of it because it's one of those things where they didn't talk about stuff like that. I mean, I really wish he would have. I wish I would have known something about him. I know he had a Bronze Star and that he ended up continuing a convoy when one of the other truck drivers ditched. And I really don't want to end up like that. I don't want to be drinking all of tonight just to deal with my emotions, or all this weekend. I want to learn those coping skills. And that's kind of really what I want to do for this podcast is, figure out different ways to healthily do all this stuff, like confronting your grief head on and not using alcohol to cope and not replacing a person with a substance, and what kind of coping skills we can use to avoid substances. And I mean, like I've said, even if you're not trying to fully quit, if you're just cutting down, just giving you a reason not to drink. If you go tonight without drinking or this weekend without drinking and you're I guess it'd be good if it was a forethought. If you're like, oh, I really want to drink and then leave. I want to get to the point where, I go through an entire weekend and get to work Sunday night and I'm like, you know what? I didn't drink it all this weekend. Or if I'm going to upload the podcast and I'm like, hey, I didn't drink. That's honestly the point I want to get to. And that's really what I'm hoping to create with this podcast and just kind of turn it into something, that I use to help somebody, even if it's just one person. If one person comes and listens to all these and is like, you made me want to be better, whatever, that's great. If I can help a ton of people and be proud that I'm doing it and not doing it to be, I don't know, the center spotlight, because that's honestly not what I want. I don't want to become rich off my podcasts. I mean, I've sunk money into them, so I'm really not doing it for the money. I've lost more than I probably ever gain, but I just want to be able to, make a difference, a positive difference. I've spent so long making an absolute clown of myself that I'd love to, help somebody and make their life better. So I hope this honestly helped. I've just had a lot on my mind, especially with my grandpa passing and just thinking about everything. And I hope if you've had somebody pass or are having somebody pass, it's coming. As always, you can email me. We can sit down and have a chat if you want to be on the podcast. You can share your story if you don't want to be on the podcast. We can call and talk and I can kind of convey a little bit of it, or we don't even have to put it on here, honestly. If you just want to sit and talk, I'm more than here for you, at least right now with it being so small. If it ever gets big, I'd also like to have that too. I'd love to eventually stream this and have people put in their story and be like, I dealt with blank and overcame, whatever substance, or I use this. I mean, honestly, I'd love for that to become a thing. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, and email me. You can email me at either letsexamineaddictionhonestly@gmail.com or theleahpodcast@gmail.com with any feedback, ideas, or stories as well. And as always, as Alan Watts says, you are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Thank you so much for listening. As you go through the rest of your week, just know you are loved, you matter. Have a wonderful rest of your week and the rest of your day. Bye.